Hello. Welcome to tonight's bedtime story by Lucid Tales. I hope your day has been loving and cozy, but whether it has been like stretching your hands out to a warm fire or frostbitten fingers, it's time to relax now. Find somewhere comfortable, maybe your bed or a favorite armchair, and make sure you're ready for sleep. Take your shoes off if you can, and feel the freedom in your toes, the little loosening that means it's time for bed. Tonight's story is a special one, because it is the first tale in my collection Genre Fluid, released at the end of this month. I hope you enjoy it. It is called The Frost. The nights were drawing in, and the frost was starting to touch the land again. Maria pulled her cloak tighter around her and quickened her pace toward home. She passed no one on the moor road. Most people were sensible enough not to risk getting caught out after dark. The sun was steadily slipping below the horizon, and her breath was misting in the cold air. She broke into a jog, hitching her heavy skirts up around her ankles. As the final sliver of sun slipped below the land, she saw the welcome light of her doorway, the beloved shadow of her husband standing looking out. The light was fading faster now that the sun was gone, and the chill was biting at her thin, bare fingers. She slowed as she reached the gate outside the cottage and let herself in. The cold iron bit into her skin, and she hurried through, closing it carefully and running up the path to the front door. Her husband, Tay, stepped aside as she entered and closed the door before catching her up in a tight hug, kissing her cold face. In contrast, his heat felt burning. She smiled into his kiss and relaxed into the warmth of his embrace. "Cutting it fine, love," he chastised gently. Maria turned away to pull in the latch string for the night. "A necessary evil. At least I have them now." "You found them?" Tay's eyes widened. He grinned suddenly. "Should have known you'd manage it." "Doubting me already, husband of mine," Maria teased, taking his hand and heading to the table. The room wasn't yet much warmer than outside. The fire had been untended too long. "It's colder than a witch's nipple in here, Tay." "Sorry, love. Waiting for you to outrun frost gets a bit tense." He crossed to the fireplace and gently coaxed the fire back into being. Maria moved to sit beside him, stretching her tawny, frozen hands out to the flames. "You sure you don't want to just sit in the damn fire?" Tay laughed. "Burned enough witches around here, thank you very much." Maria gave him a friendly shove and fed a handful of sticks into the fire. "Careful, I'll be for dinner next if you try and push me in the fire again." "What is for dinner?" "Have a guess." Stew, or maybe even stew," said Maria with a grin. "Stew it is, your prize stew." "Exciting." Maria pushed herself to a standing position and brushed the dirt off her knees. "Did you add much to it, or just keep staring?" "I pulled up some of the frost-touched carrots and radishes and put them in." "Radishes in stew?" Maria wrinkled her nose. "At least this way we can eat them rather than wasting them." Tay stood and lifted the lid of the pot above the fire. Quickly poking a finger in, he tasted the stew inside. "Lukewarm. Sorry, Mari. It'll heat up soon enough." "Oh well. Gives us some time to prepare the herbs. Get us a knife." Half an hour later, Tay got up to check on the stew, his hands red with the juice from the shredded bloodthorn. Maria swept the slender tendrils off the table and into a small earthenware jar. Securing the lid, she placed the jar on the mantel above the fireplace, beside a row of similar containers. "It's done, I think," Tay said, swinging the pot out from over the fire. "All right, go wash your hands and I'll clean up the table." Tay glanced out of the window. Frost is in full force. Shaking his head with a sigh, he soaked his hands in the washing bowl beside their rough bed. Maria scrubbed the table with soap sand and water, trying to get the last stains of the bloodthorn juice out of the grain. It was never a good idea to have it around too long. It was a bad luck plant, bringer of death and poisons. Outside, the frost crept, curling around the houses, staring in at windows and painting them with its icy breath, jealous of the heat within. It slipped through the valleys and coated the hills, covering the land in a pale sheet, freezing blades of grass and sheathing ponds in ice, creating a frozen landscape in which it was king. By morning, the house was cold. Maria woke and at first wriggled closer to Tay to warm herself. Then, realizing the fire was out, she sighed and opened her eyes to the cold, grey light of dawn. She reached for her shawl and sat up, pulling it around her shoulders. It was far too cold to be awake at this hour. The witch blood was burning this morning. Groaning, she placed her feet on the frozen, packed earth ground with its thin covering of rushes and resigned herself to chilblains. She stood and shuffled over to the still warm grate and began building a small cooking fire. It was never a good idea to let a fire burn out now that the frost had returned. The thought of the frost set her blood burning hotter, and she nearly went for the earthenware jars, but restrained herself. Later, she reminded herself. It wouldn't do to waste the contents on an impulse. She struck sparks onto the dried leaves and kindling, but they steadfastly refused to take. She muttered a curse under her breath and looked over to where Tay was still quietly snoring. He was always a heavy sleeper. She quickly snapped her fingers and made a sharp gesture. Fire leapt in the grate, sending the leaves and twigs merrily crackling. Within a few minutes, one of the logs had caught, so Maria stood to return to bed for a while longer. She didn't have to be up before sunrise now. After Slip, their cow got frost-touched. A sad convenience. Maria missed her. Mari? Tay's sleepy voice startled her and she smiled. I'm here, love. I was just relighting the fire. Come back to bed, dear heart. Maria slid back under the rough woolen blanket and pressed close against Tay. He turned to look at her and frowned. You promised, Mari. It's too dangerous to use it lightly like that. What if a witch hunter hears and comes for you? Maria didn't reply, a wave of distant guilt flying through her. There was silence for a moment. How can you tell? She asked quietly. Your eyes are always so bright afterwards, Tay murmured, stroking her cheek. I can't help it. I'm made for it. Sometimes it just slips out. I know, love, I know. He pulled her close and stroked her hair. Usually the gesture would have calmed her, but her blood was burning and she pulled away. I think it's tonight. She left the bed again, ignoring the cold floor on her feet. She crossed to the window and breathed on it, clearing a small circle of frost feathers. When she was a little girl, she'd loved playing with them. Now they were a symbol of everything she had come to hate. Tonight? Tay sat up and scrambled to his feet, pulling the blanket around his broad shoulders. Are you sure, Myra? It's not yet the solstice. The world outside was cold and silent, frozen to the bone. The grass was white, the vegetables frostbitten. Any animals out last night would now be solid, staring lumps of ice. She clenched her teeth. Tonight. I can feel it burning. It's calling me, Tay. The frost was not an adversary to be taken lightly, and the solstice would be when she was at her most powerful, but the singing in her bones told her that by then it would be too late. I don't think it's a good idea, Maria. She sighed and leaned her forehead against the glass. She loved her husband dearly, but he was not a witch. There was not one drop of the blood in him, let alone instincts that came with it. They operated on entirely different planes. There is no other way. It must be tonight. Love, you need... She felt his hands reaching out to touch her shoulders. Don't tell me what I need, Tay, she snapped, turning to face him. The hurt in his face halted her, and she sighed, softening. I trust you to know best how to butcher a cow, plough a field and turn wood into beauty. You must trust me when I say this, Tay. This must happen. Tay's blue eyes bored into hers, doubt and love and worry filling them. I trust you. That afternoon, once the sun was shining and the frost melted away, they made their way up to the ring. The ring was an ancient circle from before the first frost, many centuries before. Formed of 3 rings, 2 stone and 1 earth, it was full of old power, soaked into the very rocks. It was on the crest of Devil's Hill, and once witches were believed to copulate with the devil there to create changelings and body-born demons. Most people didn't believe that now. Witches were either disbelieved or ignored for the most part, unless the hunters came to town. But they never bothered with small villages like this, with their smattering of houses and not even a market. Maria finished the climb just ahead of Tay and set down her bundle in the centre of the rings of stone and earth. She went to one of the towering pillars of rock and reverently stroked a hand down it. Tay dropped his bundle beside hers and stood behind her, sliding his arms around her waist and looking at the view over her shoulder. For a moment she let herself relax into him, imagining that the country laid out so beautifully before her was free of the blight of the frost, that the evil that crept in the darkness was banished once more. But that was not the case, and the world got colder every year. She shook herself and stepped away from Tay. There was much to do before sundown. Maria spent the rest of the afternoon directing Tay to tie bundles of herbs into different pouches and hang them from the highest tops of the stones. She herself buried Bloodthorn and Darknot at the foot of the outermost circle, Goreberry and Leonand in the earthen bank, and Earthblood, Snowberry and Bowranth under the innermost circle of stones. Banishment and bad luck, protection and good luck, power and warmth. When at last she had finished, she stood in the centre of the circle and spread her arms, stretching out her fingers as she cast out her power, feeling it radiate within the circles, made stronger by the herbs. Pulling herself back in, she nodded in satisfaction. I'm all done, love. Where do you want me? Tay hugged her briefly. She turned. At home, where it's safe. He opened his mouth to protest. The battle tonight will not be easily won, Tay, and I cannot protect you as well as myself. At home you will be safe. I want to be able to protect you if I have to, he said stubbornly. You can't. This is a battle of witches, love. A mortal man has no place here. She held him tight to her. Only one can leave the circle alive once it has been fully cast. I don't want to lose you, even if I myself must be lost. The land will need you if I'm gone. Is there nothing I can do? I can fight, you know that. Poor stubborn Tay. He was so dear to her. Please go, my love. If you stay, you will die. I could not bear that. Please, go. You must be home before dark. And you? I will be safe in the circle until it comes. If all went according to plan, at least. I will keep the candles burning all night for you. I know. I love you. She held him tighter and kissed him fiercely. Please go. Be safe, my love. She released him and pushed him back a step. I will. I love you too, my dear heart. If you're not back by morning, I will come here, frost or no frost, and find you. With that, he left, looking back over his shoulder a few times. Maria watched his solitary figure grow smaller and more distant until he rounded the hill by the village, just as the sun was creeping onto the horizon. Within a half hour, the sun had set. Maria sat on the cold, hard ground. The air inside the circle was unnaturally warm, even for a night before the frost. Was it a spell someone cast? Or something more elemental? She had never known. But it had ceased to matter. Whatever it was, however it came about, something must be done. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders as the grass around the edges of the outer circle began to turn white and stiffen. A cold breath gusted through the circle, and the outer grass began to crumple and blacken, frost-touched. It did not fully freeze, however. The outer circle at least was strong. Maria scrambled to her feet and dug them firmly into the earth in the very center of the circles. It was coming. For almost an hour she could feel it drawing closer, stealthy and quiet, almost like a living creature. It prowled around the circle, testing her defenses, nosing first here, then there in search of an opening. Then suddenly, and without warning, it struck. A howling gale nearly blew Maria off her feet, the icy wind biting right through her. Digging her feet even harder into the ground, she leaned into the force and defied it. She drew her power about her like a cloak, and the gale immediately separated around the warm sphere of energy. Within a second it dropped. The frost went back to prowling, more wary now she had shown her power. It howled at her. The chilling sound of 1,000 cracking ice rivers, 100 snow-broken trees falling, 1,000 angry winds. She felt a chill in her bones, forcing them to still, dulling the singing, slowly turning her to ice. With a contemptuous flick of her wrist, the ice forming around her shattered, and her bones heated to a searing pain, driving out the frost. After that, it began to attack relentlessly, sending shard after shard icy blasts and cold snows, biting hail and slick ice to batter her, trying to make her lose her footing. She melted the ice around her feet, and soon the firm ground was a puddle of muddy slush that seeped into her shoes and bit like teeth. The winds she deflected with her heart's warmth, the snow and hail she melted or bounced off, countering every attack with ease. She began to feel almost confident. Then the frost reminded her it was no mere witch, no insignificant living creature that could be tricked into submission. It unleashed an absolute stillness. It was the silence of the grave, the coldness of the last light in a man's life, the blindest, dark-covered night, the taste of death and nothingness, the heart of winter. Maria's breath caught, fear and cold in her chest. This was no spell. No human creature could have cast this, summoned up such a monstrous force. This was something much older and deeper. This was the true power of the frost. The unending silence of death, the skeletons of trees, and the freezing, heart-stopping cold of fear. It was this that she would have to do battle with. And she didn't think she could face it. As she stood there, frost and ice forming on her skin, her boots, her eyelashes freezing solid, she hesitated. And the frost, sensing her indecision, her weakness, intensified its power. She could feel her hair solidifying, her skin cracking and the blood below freezing before it could even begin to ooze. All was lost. She could not move. A wave of despair crashed through her, followed by another. The frost was winning, holding her in its grip, ready to crush her at any moment. What could she do? She, a mere witchwoman, against the might of true winter. There was nothing. The land would be shrouded in cold for the rest of eternity. Then a spark lit in her sluggish, frozen mind. A tiny image, a memory. She and Tay, laughing, running home ahead of frost and slamming the door as the ice crept right up to it. Collapsing in front of the fire together, making love, adrenaline coursing through them, relieved and laughing and alive. A warmth returned to her fingers and crept slowly up her arms toward her shoulders. Her heart began to beat faster again as the heat entered, spreading through her chest and belly. It was like being slipped into a warm bath, pressing against Tay's hot body on a cold morning, stretching her hands out to a fire after a day's work. She would live. They would live. The land would live. "We beat you then, we can beat you now," she cried, unleashing her will, her rage and love and fear, spreading it through the circles, lighting on herb pouch after herb pouch, weaving a net of witchery and strength through which the frost could not hope to escape. The stones lent her their power, strengthening the bonds and pulling the net tight. The frost gave up its crushing stillness and threw winds, gales, howling blizzards, snow storms, thunder and lightning, hail and winter rain, ice and death at her, each caught and trapped by the web of power. She spread her fingers wide and clenched them tightly, drawing in the net around the frost and pulling it down deep into the ground, right through the center of the circle and under it. She sent it down into the melting blood of the earth, to the molten, crushing rock and further still. And there she trapped it, speaking the 3 words of power that no man spoke and lived, binding it beyond any chance of escape. A last echoing howl issued from the ground, and then all was still. The night was still cold, but the stars were shining brightly, and an owl flew overhead. The grass, though it was blackened, was not frozen. The frost was defeated. Maria caught sight of a rabbit running past and smiled, weary and glad. An omen. The animals would return, were already returning. The land would heal. She stepped out of the puddle around her feet and stared at her badly frostbitten hands. What was a finger or 2 in exchange for the land? Nothing. Wearily she kissed the stone nearest and murmured her gratitude, before facing east and slowly heading toward home. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Sleep well. Good night. And I will see you on Monday for another bedtime story.